It wasn't that long ago when mob bosses in America were celebrities. Their names filled newspapers, their faces filled headlines. From New York to Las Vegas, everyone knew who ran what and who to fear. But that era is gone. If you visit the FBI's own website today, their official history of La Cosa Nostra, America's brand of organized crime, ends in 2005 with the death of one man, Vincent the Chin Gigante. Gigante was old school. His story began in the 1950s under Vito Genovese, the feared head of the Genovese crime family. Genovese wanted control of the entire New York mob, and to do that, he needed to take out his rival, Frank Costello, the man the underworld called the Prime Minister. In May 1957, Gigante waited outside Costello's apartment building on Central Park West. When Costello arrived home, Gigante stepped out of the shadows and fired. The bullet grazed Costello's head, missing by inches. Costello survived, but the message landed. Days later, he retired after more than 30 years in the business. Genovese took over and renamed the Luciano family after himself. Under his leadership, the Genovese family rose to the top of La Cosa Nostra. Genovese controlled rackets from his prison cell in Atlanta after a 1960 conviction for narcotics conspiracy. When he died behind bars in 1969, his loyal enforcer, Vincent Gigante, inherited the throne. For the next 3 decades, Gigante ran one of the most powerful crime families in America while pretending to be insane. He wandered the streets of Greenwich Village in a bathrobe and slippers, muttering to himself. Neighbors called him the Odd Father, but it was all an act, a cover designed to keep law enforcement off his trail. It worked for years until federal prosecutors finally caught up. Convictions for racketeering, murder conspiracy, and obstruction of justice landed him in federal custody in 1997. He stayed there until his death in 2005 at the same prison hospital where another New York legend, John Gotti of the Gambino family, had died 3 years earlier. Gigante's death marked the end of an era, the last of the celebrity mob bosses. Today, the American Mafia still exists, but no one knows exactly who's in charge. The FBI uses the term acting boss, temporary titles for men who fill the void, usually until they're indicted. The mystique, the household names, the public power, it's all faded into the shadows. Outside the United States, the picture looks different. In places like Italy, Russia, Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, Mexico, and across Latin America, mob leaders still hold real sway. Sometimes with political protection, sometimes through pure terror. Some are untouchable, others don't live long enough to become legends. This is the modern underworld. A global network built on old codes, new money, and the same deadly ambition. Next, we'll look at 5 countries where organized crime still thrives, and the men who run it from the dark. In the world of organized crime, few names carry the weight or the reach of Semion Mogilevich. To law enforcement, he's the brainy Don. To others, he's the boss of bosses. And to the FBI for 6 long years, he was one of the most wanted men on Earth. Semion Yudkovich Mogilevich was born in Ukraine in 1946, back when it was still part of the Soviet Union. He wasn't a street thug. He was educated, disciplined, and patient, the kind of man who preferred contracts to gunfire. With a degree in economics, he understood money better than most bankers. That's what made him dangerous. In the early 1970s, Mogilevich joined the Lyubotskaya crime clan, one of the Soviet Union's early criminal organizations. He learned the trade from inside, extortion, fraud, smuggling, but his ambitions stretched further. By the time the Soviet system collapsed, Mogilevich was already building his own empire, a syndicate known as the Solntsevo Group, one of the most powerful Russian mafia networks to ever operate. In the 1980s, as thousands of Jewish families fled the Soviet Union for Israel, Mogilevich saw opportunity. He offered to help immigrants liquidate their assets, promising to transfer their savings abroad. Instead, he stole millions, using the money to bankroll a web of criminal and legitimate businesses across Europe. By the 1990s, Mogilevich's empire reached North America. In Canada, he founded a company called YBM Magnex International, supposedly a magnet manufacturer based near Philadelphia. But Mogilevich never set foot in the city. The entire operation was a front, a shell company built to launder money and defraud investors. According to the FBI, YBM's stock price rose more than 2,000% thanks to falsified financial reports, bribes to auditors, and lies fed to US securities officials. By the time investigators caught up, investors had lost over $150 million. Mogilevich, as always, had already vanished. He became the embodiment of the global mobster, short, heavy-set, a chain smoker, and fluent in the language of finance. The FBI charged him with over 40 counts, including racketeering, wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He's been linked to arms deals, narcotics, and even murder-for-hire schemes. Interpol lists him among Europe's most wanted men. In 1999, Russian officials accused him of laundering $500 million through the Bank of New York, a scandal that shook international finance. Later in 2005, Ukrainian investigators tied him to corrupt gas import deals involving senior politicians. Yet through it all, Mogilevich has lived comfortably in Moscow. The FBI admitted as much when they quietly removed him from their 10 most wanted list in 2015. Their reasoning was simple: they knew where he was and they couldn't touch him. Russia has no extradition treaty with the United States. In today's Russia, protection is everything. And few men are better protected than Semion Mogilevich. He doesn't hide, he doesn't run. He moves in the open, a reminder that in the modern underworld, power isn't always earned with a gun. Sometimes it's signed with a pen. In Japan, organized crime has a name and a face. The name is Yakuza. The face belongs to an older generation of men whose time may be running out. For more than a century, the Yakuza stood as Japan's underworld aristocracy, disciplined, organized, and embedded in society. They collected debts, ran gambling halls, controlled nightlife, and even provided disaster relief when the government couldn't move fast enough. But the world changed. The tolerance that once allowed them to operate in the open began to fade. By 2016, Japan's National Police Agency estimated there were just 39,000 active Yakuza members, down from 63,000 only 4 years earlier. The decline was fueled by new anti-gang laws, public pressure, and a younger generation uninterested in the rigid codes and bloody traditions of the past. At the center of that decline stands the Yamaguchi-gumi, the oldest and most powerful of Japan's 4 major Yakuza families. Based in Kobe, the group traces its roots back to 1915, more than 100 years of hierarchy, honor, and quiet brutality. But even giants crack from within. In 2015, a split shook the organization. A faction broke away to form the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi, a rival group that challenged the leadership of longtime boss Kenichi Shinoda, better known as Shinobu Tsukasa. 2 years later, in 2017, another splinter faction emerged, the Ninkyo Yamaguchi-gumi, led by Kunio Inoue, after clashes over money and loyalty tore the syndicate further apart. The result was chaos, turf wars, arrests, and public embarrassment. That same year, 2 members of the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi, aged 52 and 59, were caught stealing groceries from a shopping mall. The haul was small: rice, a watermelon, and eel. When police questioned them, one of the men admitted, "The group is so poor, we have to shoplift." For an organization once estimated to pull in billions from drug trafficking, gambling, prostitution, and extortion, the image was humiliating, a symbol of decline. But the story of the Yakuza isn't finished, and among the remnants of the empire, one man's name stood out: Shigeharu Shirai, a 74-year-old former Yamaguchi-gumi leader, fled Japan in 2005 after a gangland murder in the city of Kato. He resurfaced in Thailand, living quietly on an expired visa, blending into the heat and noise of Southeast Asia, until a few photographs changed everything. In early 2018, someone snapped pictures of Shirai playing checkers shirtless on a Thai sidewalk. His body told the story his passport did not: vibrant floral tattoos covering his chest, arms, and back, the unmistakable ink of a Yakuza elder. The photos went viral. Japanese police saw them, contacted Thai authorities, and within days, Shirai was arrested. He denied the 2003 murder charges, but the evidence of his past was written on his skin and on his hands. One finger was missing, his left pinky cut clean below the first knuckle. In Yakuza culture, that's yubitsume, a ritual amputation to show apology or submission after dishonor. Shigeharu Shirai's fall from shadow to spotlight symbolized something larger, the end of an era when the Yakuza could disappear into society and remain untouchable. The old codes are breaking down. The tattoos that once inspired fear now expose the fugitives who wear them, and the criminal brotherhood that once ruled Japan's underworld is aging, divided, and slowly fading from the streets it once controlled. The story of modern organized crime begins in Italy, in the hills of Sicily, in the 1800s, where distrust of the state and a culture of silence gave birth to something darker: the Mafia. It started as protection. It became power. And more than a century later, it remains, diminished but never destroyed. Sicily's own governor, Rosario Crocetta, once put it plainly: "You are never going to win victory over the Mafia, just as you can never totally defeat evil." For generations, the Sicilian Mafia, Cosa Nostra, ruled through fear, corruption, and violence. But its power began to crumble in 1992 when the organization crossed a line that shook Italy to its core. That year, two men, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, were leading a crusade against organized crime. Both were magistrates, both had spent their careers bringing the Mafia to court, and both knew the risks. In May 1992, a highway near Palermo exploded. A car bomb killed Falcone, his wife, and his police escort. Less than 2 months later, another bomb tore through a street in Palermo, killing Borsellino and 5 bodyguards. The killings shocked the nation. They were Italy's St. Valentine's Day massacre, a moment of reckoning that turned public fear into fury. Millions took to the streets demanding justice. The government responded with sweeping anti-mafia laws, military raids, and mass arrests. One of those arrests came in 1993. The man they caught was Salvatore Toto Riina, the brutal capo dei capi, the boss of bosses in Palermo. Riina had orchestrated the murders of Falcone and Borsellino, along with more than 100 others. He ruled through terror, hiding in plain sight while his men enforced his orders with bombs and bullets. The courts gave him 26 life sentences. He spent the rest of his life behind bars, dying in prison in November 2017, one day after his 87th birthday. With Riina gone, Cosa Nostra's influence weakened, but it didn't vanish. In Palermo, some mafia factions have joined forces with Nigerian criminal groups, particularly the Vikings, a gang that traffics women into prostitution under the guise of debt repayment. Meanwhile, Sicilian bosses have diversified, moving beyond extortion and public works fraud into drug smuggling, especially hashish imported from North Africa. But today, the Sicilians no longer sit at the top of Italy's criminal hierarchy. That title belongs to another syndicate, the Ndrangheta from Calabria. Once dismissed as rural extortionists, the Ndrangheta quietly built a global network. They now control most of Europe's cocaine trade, laundering billions through shell companies, hotels, and bars. Their reach extends deep into Germany, and their shipments flow through the ports of Rotterdam and Antwerp. Even so, Italian police have been chipping away at their leadership. In June 2017, Carabinieri officers tracked down Giuseppe U. Capra Giorgi, a fugitive drug boss who had been hiding for 23 years. When they raided his home in Calabria, Giorgi tried to conceal himself behind a fireplace. It didn't work. He was arrested and taken away quietly, the end of a long chase that began with a 1994 conviction for drug trafficking. Investigators also tied him to arms dealing and the illegal disposal of toxic waste, including a ship sunk off Italy's coast. Then, in April 2018, police caught another high-ranking fugitive, Giuseppe Pelle, head of the Pelvotari clan and a member of the Ndrangheta's ruling council. Officers found him sleeping on a couch in an isolated hideout, dressed and ready to run. And still, one name casts the longest shadow. Matteo Messina Denaro, known as Diabolic. A native of Trapani, Sicily, Denaro disappeared in 1993 and has remained on Italy's most wanted list ever since. He's accused of dozens of murders, including the bombings that killed Falcone and Borsellino. Even in hiding, he runs his syndicate through trusted lieutenants and family. In April 2018, police arrested 2 of his brothers-in-law and 19 associates, all accused of managing his rackets, extortion, fraud, and skimming public contracts. With Riina dead, many believe Denaro is the last great capo of the Sicilian Mafia, but time and the law are closing in. In Italy, the Mafia has survived wars, dictatorships, and decades of crackdowns, yet every generation of bosses grows smaller, older, and more cautious. The Cosa Nostra may never vanish, but its days of ruling with impunity are fading into history. For more than a decade, Mexico has been living through a war with no front lines and no clear end. Since 2006, when the government first sent the military to fight the cartels, more than 200,000 people have been killed or vanished. Entire towns have been torn apart. Streets once ruled by local police now answer to men with rifles and radios. The cartels fight over everything: drugs, people, oil, minerals, territory, anything that turns a profit. And every time the government strikes a blow, the cartels adapt. When a boss is captured, another steps in. When a route is closed, a new one opens. Bribery fills the cracks in the system, from small-town police stations to the highest levels of government. Today, one name stands above the rest: the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, or CJNG. Formed around 2010, CJNG was born from rebellion. Its founders were once part of the Sinaloa cartel's armed wing, until they broke away to form their own syndicate. Within years, they went from local enforcers to international traffickers, building an empire on methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl. At the top sits Nemesio Oseguara-Cervantes, known as El Mencho. Born in 1966 in the state of Michoacán, El Mencho started out small, a farmhand turned police officer turned criminal. In the early 1990s, he was arrested in California and convicted for conspiracy to distribute heroin. He served 3 years in U.S. prison, then returned to Mexico to rebuild his empire. What followed was a rise few could match. Under El Mencho, CJNG became Mexico's most feared cartel, ruthless, militarized, and sophisticated. His organization is known for downing military helicopters, ambushing police convoys, and flooding the US with synthetic drugs. The DEA calls him one of the world's most dangerous traffickers, and under the US Kingpin Act, his name carries some of the toughest financial sanctions ever imposed. His reach is global, but his whereabouts remain a mystery. While Jalisco rose, Mexico's once dominant Sinaloa cartel began to fracture. Sinaloa was the empire of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the most infamous drug lord of the 21st century. For decades, El Chapo controlled a vast smuggling network that stretched from the mountains of Sinaloa to the streets of Chicago and New York. But his downfall came in 2016, when Mexican Marines captured him after his second escape from prison. A year later, he was extradited to the United States. In 2019, El Chapo stood trial in a Brooklyn courtroom, facing charges of murder, drug trafficking, and organized crime. The evidence was overwhelming. He now serves a life sentence in a maximum security U.S. prison. His absence left a power vacuum. Inside Sinaloa, the cartel split into rival factions, some loyal to El Chapo's sons, Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo Alfredillo Guzman Salazar, others rallying around his brother Aureliano Guzman Loera, known as El Guano. 2 other figures continue to shape the balance of power: Rafael Caro Quintero, once head of the old Guadalajara cartel, and Ismael El Mayo Zambada Garcia, El Chapo's longtime partner. Caro Quintero's name carries a heavy shadow. In 1985, he was accused of ordering the kidnapping and murder of agent Enrique Kiki Camarena, a killing that marked the first major war between the US and Mexican cartels. After serving 28 years in prison, Caro Quintero was released on a legal technicality in 2013 and vanished soon after. The US State Department still offers a $20 million reward for his capture, one of the highest bounties in the world. American agents believe he directs operations in Badiraguato, Sinaloa, running shipments alongside the remnants of El Chapo's network. Then there's El Mayo Zambada, Sinaloa's ghost. He's been in the business for more than 40 years and has never spent a day behind bars. The US government has a $5 million reward on his head, accusing him of moving tons of cocaine, heroin, and marijuana across the border, using planes, trucks, and tunnels. So who runs Mexico's underworld now? It depends who you ask. Some say El Mencho, the new king of a new generation. Others point to Caro Quintero, the old lion who refuses to die. But the truth is darker. The war itself, the chaos, the corruption, the endless blood, that's the real boss of Mexico now. In America, the Mafia never truly vanished. It just slipped back into the shadows. And every few years, something happens to remind the public that La Cosa Nostra still breathes. In May 2017, the FBI made its move. 19 alleged members and leaders of the Lucchese crime family were arrested across New York and New Jersey, accused of everything from racketeering to murder. The headlines that followed looked almost nostalgic. Reporters dusted off the old nicknames: Paulie Roast Beef, Joey Glasses. The Guardian even joked that the case felt like a deleted scene from Goodfellas. But this was no movie. As acting US Attorney June H. Kim said at the time, La Cosa Nostra remains alive and active in New York City, but so does our commitment to eradicate the mob's parasitic presence. The arrests were proof of what investigators already knew. The families still exist, still operate, still earn. These days, the FBI recognizes 6 main branches: the Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, and Bonanno families of New York, and across the river, the De Cavalcante family of New Jersey. Each family still follows the old blueprint: a boss, an underboss, and a consigliere with capos, soldiers, and associates beneath them. The structure hasn't changed in 100 years. What's changed is the money and the ambition. The 2017 Lucchese case was built on nearly 2 decades of surveillance and wiretaps. It reached back to crimes committed between 2000 and 2017, exposing an aging hierarchy that refused to quit. At the top was Matthew Madonna, the family's street boss, 82 years old and still running things. His underboss, Stephen Wonderboy Crea Sr., was 70. The consigliere, Joseph DiNapoli, was also 82. Then came Crea's son, Stephen Jr., 46, part of a younger generation keeping the old business alive. Federal prosecutors accused them of everything from drug trafficking and gambling to money laundering, wire fraud, and murder. The indictment also named Christopher Londonio, 44, and Terence Caldwell, 60, both tied to one of the case's darkest chapters. In November 2013, a 62-year-old mob hitman named Michael Meldish was found slumped in his car in the Bronx, a bullet in his head. Meldish was no innocent. He'd been part of the old Purple Gang, a crew of enforcers and drug dealers that once bridged the Lucchese, Genovese, and Bonanno families. Police linked him to at least 10 murders, but in the mob world, debts get called in eventually. Prosecutors say Madonna, Crea Sr., Crea Jr., Londonio, and Caldwell conspired to have Meldish killed, a power play inside a shrinking empire. At the same time, Crea Sr. faced separate charges of fraud, accused of trying to skim profits from a $25 million expansion of New York Hospital. By May 2018, the Justice Department confirmed it wouldn't seek the death penalty for any of the defendants. But that didn't make their situation less grim. If convicted, each man faced life in prison, the same slow end that swallowed so many mobsters before them. Still, the case served as a reminder, even as time erodes the old Mafia myth, the machinery of La Cosa Nostra keeps turning. It's smaller, quieter, and far less glamorous, but it's not dead. The Goodfellas of today don't run nightclubs or casinos. They run wire fraud schemes and untaxed cigarette routes. They traffic opioids instead of bootleg whiskey. The faces have aged, the profits have shrunk, and the world has moved on. But behind the courtrooms and the nostalgia, one truth remains. America's Mafia is never gone, only waiting for its next indictment.